Hi, welcome to a video on fundamental identities. And the fundamental identities we're going to do is related to the Pythagorean identities, number 2. Number 1 was the previous one, now we're going to do number 2. One of the Pythagorean identities is cos squared theta plus sine squared theta equals 1. And we looked at that, but this one can also be written as cos squared theta equals 1 minus sine squared. Notice that if you leave the cos here, you can subtract, move the sine to the right and make it a negative. Or you can say sine squared is 1 minus cos squared. In other words, if you leave the sine on the left, the cos moves over to the right and changes sign. So this is another one that you have to recognize to help you simplify the expressions easily. Let's do some examples. Simplify each. 1 minus cos squared is sine squared over sine cos, and notice they cancel to give you sine theta. And 1 minus sine squared is cos squared divided by cos squared, and that gives you 1. So 1 minus cos squared is sine squared. 1 minus sine squared is cos squared, coming out of this fundamental identity on Pythagorean. And another one, C, 1 minus sine squared is cos squared. 1 minus cos squared is sine squared. And that's simplified, but if you want, we could also call it cos over sine is cot. So that could also be changed to cot squared. So cos squared over sine squared is cot squared. D, 1 plus cos theta, 1 minus cos theta. When you multiply by FOIL, you get 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative cos theta. Cos theta times 1 is positive cos theta. Positive times a negative is a negative. Cos times cos is cos squared theta. So that plus is not needed there. And notice the middle terms cancel out. We get 1 minus cos squared. Notice this is the difference of two squares. A squared plus b squared. It's 1, 1, cos plus minus. And again, 1 minus cos squared could be called sine squared if you wish to change it. So again, memorize this one, but also recognize these two. Here we go. 1 minus sine squared is cos squared theta. Cos squared plus sine squared is 1. So cos squared divided by 1 is cos squared. Tan is sine over cos, because the squared is sine squared over cos squared. And 1 minus sine squared is cos squared. This is a multiplication, so I'll put a dot there, multiplication. Notice now that I have them changed. The cos's cancel out because they're fractions, they cancel. So I get a sine squared. So again, important to memorize these to be able to recognize them. It just works fast. G, we have 1. Cot is cos squared theta over sine squared theta. And sine squared, again, this is a multiplication, understood. And because we're multiplying, we have to multiply before we subtract. They cancel out. 1, 1. We get 1 minus cos squared. And 1 minus cos squared becomes sine squared. H. Let's simplify. Let's change tan first. Tan is sine theta over cos theta. Cot is cos times sine, so it's cos theta over sine theta. Sine theta, cosecant is 1 over sine. And notice that these cancel out because you're multiplying. You cancel from top to bottom. Again, tan times cot are reciprocals of each other, so you could have canceled right here. So that's a 1 right there. And because we're dividing by 1 over sine theta, we multiply by the reciprocal, which is sine theta over 1. That gives us 1 minus, we have to multiply before we subtract by PEMDAS, and that works out to be cos squared theta. 1 minus sine squared is cos squared. Again, you're simplifying, just manipulating. Now we have another one here, but I'm going to, this right now, I'm going to show you that, notice I got a secant and a cot. So if you learned that 1 plus tan squared is secant squared, and if you, that's based on this one, if you learned that 1 plus cot squared is cosecant squared, we learned on the previous page. So notice 1 plus cot squared is cosecant squared. So cosecant squared take away tan squared is 1. And 1 plus tan squared is secant squared. So secant squared subtract tan squared is 1. Again, you have to recognize that. That's why sometimes the identities are, students have trouble, because they don't recognize right away what the identities are, the ones that you already know. Okay. But let's say you didn't recognize them. Let's say you didn't know that 1 plus tan squared is secant squared. Let's say you forgot 1 plus tan squared is secant squared, or 1 plus cot squared theta is cosecant. You could also work it out recognizing that this is true here and realizing that's a 1 that we did on the previous page. You could go cosecant is 1 over sine. So cosecant squared is 1 over sine squared. Cot is cos over sine. But because the square is cos squared over sine squared. Notice the two of them have the same denominator of sine squared. So this is 1 minus cos squared. So we write down the denominator and subtract these. We can't really change them. But 1 minus cos squared is sine squared over sine squared, which is 1. So you can always get around it by changing everything to cos and sine and manipulating. But again, learning these and realizing that cosecant squared minus cot squared is 1 would have given you this right away without all this work. And that's the same here. Secant squared is 1 over cos squared. And tan squared is sine squared over cos squared. They have the same denominator of cos squared theta. So you got 1 minus sine squared on the numerator. You write down your denominator because it's common. 1 minus sine squared. And 1 minus sine squared is cos squared. and they cancel to give you 1. So again, changing to cos a sign will enable you to work it through. But again, if you know these and recognize that secant squared minus tan squared equals 1, it makes it much faster. So let's do a little bit of practice on this now. Means pause the video and work each one out. Do one at a time, see if you're all okay, or do them all and then check back. 1 minus sine squared is cos squared. Divided by cos, and again that's a square and that's a 1, so they cancel to give you cos theta. Remember, that's like an x squared divided by x. That's x2 minus 1. You subtract, that's a square and that's a 1. 2 take away 1, you get 1 left. And number 2, 1 minus cos squared is sine squared. Cot is cos squared over sine squared. Remember, cot is cos over sine because it's a square. It's cos squared over sine squared. Because we're multiplying, and that's over 1, we cancel the sine squareds out, and we just get cos squared. And remember, you got a cos squared, but you can also think about that's 1 minus sine squared as another name. Keep thinking back and forth. Number 3, we have change the tan. Tan is sine squared over cos squared theta, and cos theta, cos squared theta. So we change tan to sine over cos. Because it's a square, it's sine squared over cos squared. Now we have to do PEMDAS first, obey the order of operation. We've got to multiply first, so we cancel. That's over 1. 1, 1. We get 1 minus sine squared, which we can also call cos squared. Cos squared theta. I'm leaving the theta off each time. Number 4, simplify. Cos squared plus sine squared is 1. 1 minus cos squared is sine squared. And 1 over sine is cosecant. But 1 over sine squared is cosecant squared, because the 1 times 1 gives you a 1. So we can have 1 over sine squared, or we can say cosecant squared to simplify this. And you'll know when you do identities where to stop. I'll show you that as the videos go on. And number 5, we got a cosecant squared times sine squared plus tan squared. So let's get rid of cosecant squared is 1 over c is an s. Sine squared. Tan is sine over cos. But we put a square with each one of them. Now we have them change. Cosecant is 1 over sine squared. Tan squared is sine squared over cos squared. Got changes done. Now we have to obey PEMDAS. We got to multiply first and then add after. So they cancel out to give us 1. And we have sine squared over cos squared. And the common denominator is cos squared, so we'll go cos squared over cos squared. That's the same as 1. And the reason we did cos squared over cos squared because cos squared is this denominator of this fraction. So that gives us cos squared theta plus sine squared theta all over the same denominator of cos squared, and that's 1 over cos squared, which could become secant squared. So if you change these and manipulate them, you simplified it all to secant. Okay, let's look at another way here. You could notice that if I did this, let's go over here. If I did 1 over sine squared times sine squared, and I left the tan alone, just pretend. You cancel those, you get 1 plus tan squared. But remember, 1 plus tan squared is secant squared. But the odds, what I do, I change both of them. But if you did recognize that these are reciprocals of each other, and they will cancel out to give you 1, then 1 plus tan squared is secant squared. So it saves you all this work. But again, I believe in changing your tan and cot to cos and sines, secant and cosecant to cos and sine, and then manipulate, doing the fundamental way. Again, that's just more practice on the Pythagorean identities that you have to learn. That's why Trig is so much trouble. You get so much to keep in mind. If you like my video, click the like button, subscribe button, notification bell. Visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content that's on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained. Thank you for viewing my video. Bye-bye.